All right, let's jump right into a really fascinating paradox. You've got Plato, right? One of the most brilliant writers in all of history. I mean, his dialogues are absolute masterpieces of literary art. And yet, this same guy wanted to banish poets and painters from his ideal society. So why? Why would one of our greatest artists declare war on art itself?
Okay, so let's really dive into this. Because, this isn't some tiny little footnote in his philosophy. No way. This is a central, kind of shocking conclusion in his most famous work, The Republic. And to even begin to understand his reasons, we've got to go right to the very heart of how he saw everything: reality, knowledge, and even the human soul.
To really get Plato, you have to understand his priorities. And this quote, well, it just sets the stage perfectly. Look, he had a massive amount of respect for the great poet Homer. But when it came to building a perfect society, he was like, nope, there's something way more important. And that was truth. You see, for Plato, art was never just entertainment. It was this incredibly powerful force, and it could either lead us to the truth or, dangerously away from it. All right, so before we can get to his specific attacks on art, we first have to understand the world as Plato saw it. And trust me, his vision of reality is one of the most influential ideas in all of Western thought. It all kicks off with his theory of forms.
Okay, so everything for Plato really starts right here. He asks us to imagine that every physical thing we see around us, a chair, a tree, even a person, is just an imperfect, temporary copy of a perfect, eternal blueprint. That blueprint, that perfect idea, is what Plato calls a form, and he believed these forms exist in this higher, non-physical realm that is the real reality. So Plato basically splits reality into two different realms. On one hand, you've got the world of forms. It's perfect, it's eternal, and you can only grasp it with your mind, with reason. And then, on the other hand, there's our physical world, the world of flawed, temporary copies that we see and touch with our senses. The whole point of being a philosopher, according to Plato, was to see past all these physical shadows and get to what's actually real. Okay, so with that big idea in place, now we can start to see Plato's first major charge against art taking shape. I mean, think about it. If the physical world is already a copy, then what is a painting of something in that world? Well, for Plato, the answer is super simple. It's a lie. It's a deception.
And to make this pretty abstract idea totally concrete, Plato uses this brilliant analogy, and it involves a simple, everyday object, a couch. He uses this couch to show us exactly how far removed art is from the truth.
So here's how Plato's whole hierarchy of reality works. At the very top, you have the form. The one true, perfect, divine idea of couchness, let's call it. Okay, one step down from that, a carpenter comes along and builds a physical couch, right? An imperfect copy of that perfect form. And then, all the way at the bottom, an artist paints a picture not of the true form, but of the carpenter's copy. So what does this mean? It means the artist's work is a copy of a copy. It's what Plato calls being at the third remove from the truth. It's not just one step away from reality, it's more like a shadow of a shadow. And Plato doesn't just stop with painters, oh no. He applies this exact same devastating logic to the most celebrated artists of his time, the poets. He argues that someone like Homer, who writes these epic poems about courage, is only imitating the appearance of courage that he sees in the world. And that puts the poet just as far away from the true form of courage as the painter is from the true form of the couch. So, charge number one, art is a metaphysical lie. But Plato's indictment, it doesn't end there, not even close. He moves on to his second charge, and this one is an attack on the artist's mind. He basically argues that artists don't even know anything about the things they're imitating. And this leads Plato to his next big question. Think about it. A painter can create a really convincing image of a carpenter at work, right? But does that mean the painter actually knows anything about carpentry? For Plato, the answer is a huge, resounding no. The artist, he says, is just a master of surfaces, not of actual substance. And to prove his point, Plato goes after the biggest target you could possibly imagine, Homer. We're talking about the foundational poet of all of Greek culture, a guy who's seen as a source of wisdom on pretty much everything, from military strategy to morality, and Plato just dares to ask, did Homer actually know what he was talking about? So Plato, speaking through his character Socrates, basically puts Homer's entire legacy on trial. He's like, okay, if Homer was such an expert on how to run a city, or lead an army, or educate people, show me the proof. Where's the evidence? And the case Plato builds is honestly pretty damning.
He asks, did any city ever hire Homer to be their lawgiver? Did any general ever win a battle using one of his strategies? Unlike a philosopher like Pythagoras, Homer didn't leave behind a school of thought. The argument is, if Homer was really so wise, why did the people of his own time just let him wander around as a performer instead of, hanging on his every word? So for Plato, the conclusion is just inescapable. Poets are exactly like painters. They're experts at applying the colors of language, rhythm, meter, all that beautiful phrasing, to subjects they don't really understand. They create this beautiful surface that tricks the audience into thinking there's some deep wisdom underneath it all, when really, there's nothing there.
Okay, let's pull these two powerful arguments together now so we can really understand Plato's final and pretty harsh verdict on where the artist fits into a just society.
So Plato lays out another hierarchy, but this time it's for knowledge itself. It's brilliant. Let's take, say, a set of reins for a horse. The person who actually uses them, the horse rider, they have true knowledge of how they're supposed to work. Then you have the person who makes the reins. They have what Plato calls correct belief because they get feedback from the user. But then you have the imitator, the poet who just writes about the reins. They have neither knowledge nor correct belief. They're just mimicking the appearance for an audience that also has no idea.
So let's recap Plato's full case here. First, art is a copy of a copy, which means it's fundamentally false. Second, it's created by people who don't have real knowledge. And third, and this is a huge one, by imitating strong emotions like grief and anger, art appeals to the irrational, chaotic parts of our soul, and that weakens the power of reason. For Plato, that doesn't just mess up the individual, it threatens the entire stability of a society that's supposed to be built on logic and truth.
And that, right there, is really the heart of it all. See, we tend to think of art in terms of aesthetics, like is it beautiful, is it moving? But Plato saw it through a moral and a political lens. In his massive quest to build a society founded on reason and truth, this kind of imitative art was a dangerous source of lies and out-of-control emotion. It was a threat that had to be controlled or maybe even exiled completely.
Which kind of leaves us with a really challenging thought for today, right? I mean, we live in an age of deepfakes, virtual reality, AI-generated images. The lines between what's real and what's an imitation are blurring faster than ever before. We're literally surrounded by images designed to look real, to get a rise out of us, and to convince us of things without any proof. And it really makes you wonder, was Plato's deep fear of imitation just some ancient paranoia? Or was he giving us a profound warning about the dangers of a world that starts to value appearance more than truth? A warning that maybe, just maybe, we're only now 2,400 years later starting to really get.